Thank you for joining for another episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me my friend Kevin Simzer. Kevin, if you want to give a little bit of background on yourself for our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. It's great to be here. My name is Kevin Simzer, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Trend. I've been in cybersecurity for just over 3 decades. So I don't know, I found myself in cybersecurity early on in my career, and it just stuck with me. So I never left.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I guess I would say I've been around about the same amount of time, but a less linear path. because I was in IT, I got into cybersecurity. I did security architect and security consultant stuff for a number of years, but I was doing like writing stuff on the side, and somehow that became doing tech and security journalism, which became tech and security content marketing, which became tech and security PR, and and now I'm not even 100% tied to tech and security. Like I do a bunch of things. I just had a conversation last week with someone. We were talking about the path, like the career paths in general, and just that there isn't a right way. There isn't a one way. I think if you go talk to 50 people in cybersecurity and ask them like, okay, well, when did you know you wanted to be in cybersecurity, and what was your path to get here? People bounce all over the place to get where they are.
It's totally the case. And I do find I've talked to many people as well that have found themselves in cybersecurity. And what I find is that even maybe it's just because I've been in the industry for 3 decades, but it ends up being a bit of a smaller community than what one thinks, and you run into people over and over and over again. So when people land in cybersecurity, they often stay. I don't know what it is. There's something about, maybe it's the superhero mentality and fighting threat actors and the bad folks, and I'm not sure what it is, but you reminded me, like, while my journey might have been always in cybersecurity, my path wasn't the straightest either in terms of I've taken on many different roles. I actually started as a card-carrying software developer, and I've since retired my software development privileges, but I've evolved through different roles in the industry, and that's been good fun.
Okay. Well, it would be interesting, and I assume you still have the skills, and maybe you've dabbled with this, but I think it would be interesting to have the conversation from the perspective of your background as a developer, on where things are today in terms of generative AI and agentic AI when it comes to developing code. There's the whole thing with vibe coding, and it's funny because I actually just wrote a thing yesterday. I think it was yesterday that I published on Forbes. It was not really journalism. I mean, Forbes. I haven't heard from my editors yet, but I think I actually kind of violated Forbes policy because I'm not supposed to editorialize. But it really was just me editorializing on kind of the state of AI, and based on stuff that I see out on LinkedIn, where I'm like, there's a definite camp of people who are the AI is magic and it's going to solve every problem in the world. We're going to cure world hunger. We're going to cure cancer. We're going to solve climate change. Everything's going to happen magically because of AI. And then on the other extreme are the people who are like, it's all snake oil. The whole thing is a fraud. It's just math giving you probabilities of information that you already have access to. Like the information already exists. ChatGPT didn't come up with anything new. And my perspective on it was, okay, you're both right, but also crucially wrong at the same time. And the reality is somewhere in the middle. The reality is it's not magic. It's not going to magically solve everything, but it's also not purely snake oil. It's not it does streamline things. It does accelerate things. And when I look at it from the coding perspective, just to bring it back to that, I'm not a developer, but I would say it's probably similar to the use of AI for content creation, which is, yes, there are people who will just plug a prompt into ChatGPT and say, hey, write me a blog post or write me a white paper, and publish it as is. And those are generally not great. I mean, you can kind of tell. I liken it to asking like a fifth grader to write a research paper. Like it's from its technical aspects, it's generally right. Like it's got a thesis sentence, and it's got a conclusion, and it's got 3 body paragraphs in the middle, and it follows the very formulaic process for writing a paper that you were taught in 5th grade. But it also ends every thing with, in conclusion. It starts everything with, in this world that we live in, or whatever. Like there's just certain telltale signs. I assume it works about as well for coding. I assume that it is capable of generating functional code, but that code is not going to be necessarily the best code. It's not going to necessarily be the most secure code. But I did have a conversation last year with someone, a vendor in the business of application security, and basically, like being inserted in like a CI/CD pipeline to analyze code and make sure that it was secure before it goes to production. And we were talking about AI, and I said, well, what do you think about this? Like, about the vulnerabilities introduced by AI or whatever. And his response to me was, well, no human has ever written perfect code anyway. He's like, right. He's like, it doesn't change anything from our perspective. Like, it still has to go through the final checks before it goes to production. So like, maybe we catch more stuff when it's AI generated code, but that's maybe a fair trade-off from how fast you can work. And yeah, I mean, I think I would be interested to talk with some developers about it, because I'd be curious if it is just like content creation. Like it is a useful tool. It can help you get from blank page to, okay, now I've got something I can work with. It can help you come up with like, okay, well, what's an abstract that I can write about? Give me an outline. Give me something to get started here. It's good for a lot of things, but it does still require some expertise.
Yeah. I think to go back to the very first point, where do I sit on this spectrum of, is AI snake oil, or is it, some kind of a silver bullet, which is going to solve a lot of, or all problems? I'm probably much more on the positive side, but I do think it's somewhere in the middle. I feel like I've been through a number of massive disruptions in technology throughout the years, and this is by far the biggest, not just because of the infrastructure change that's needed, but I think the promise that it has the potential to deliver on. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but I think it does really improve productivity in terms of taking away maybe some of the more obvious, some of the more mundane things, and it's going to allow us all to focus in on maybe some of the big think ideas. Right. I've seen various statistics. I was out at a conference a couple of months back, and Google was presenting and talked about 40% of all of their code going into production is now recommended through their AI engine. They were using their words carefully, because just like Inside Trend, we're running in between 40 and 50% of the code generated and going into production is recommended, generated through AI. But it requires a very skilled, domain knowledgeable engineer to review and modify and make sure it's correct before it goes into production. So we do find that we have to have quite a bit of person power from review and approve in order to make sure that what's going into production is truly the quality that we've grown to expect. But it is fascinating, as we move from, gosh, this environment where we started this whole generative AI mission with, simple bots, copilot type of offerings. And now when you see what's unfolding with agentic AI and all the different capabilities that these new agents are delivering on, it really does, I don't know, I get giddy with excitement thinking about the potential down the road. Will we have, I've read some things that, are we going to have 1 billion or maybe even more agents than we have humans on the planet? Is that where this is going to land in the end? I'm not so sure, but it is going to get really, really exciting, I think, over the next several years.
I would agree with that. And I think we might already have more agents than humans on the planet. But it's funny that the agentic thing for me is a bit of a double-edged sword. Since Amazon first introduced Alexa and Apple introduced their virtual assistant, in my head, I've been following the progress and using the tools and always comparing them back to Tony Stark's Jarvis in Iron Man, and it's like, okay, that's the AI pinnacle. That's what I want in my AI virtual assistant, is an AI that really is like a personal assistant that doesn't just have access to information, but like knows me personally, knows that knows what I'm allergic to, knows that I don't like pickles, knows that whatever it is, and that the recommendations it gives me should be unique to me. Like it shouldn't give like if you and I both ask Alexa the same question, we should not get the same answer, because it should be through that personalized lens. And I feel like agentic AI gets us a lot closer to that. Like when I hear people talk about the promise and potential of agentic AI, when you watch the presentations from the vendors rolling things out, and they position it like, well, this is great. It'll just know that your favorite artist is Eminem, and it'll just know, well, Eminem's coming to town, and it'll check your calendar and go, hey, you're not doing anything that night, and it'll just access the Ticketmaster site and buy the tickets using your money. And I'm like, okay, all of that sounds very cool on one level, and also simultaneously very scary, because you're asking me to trust and give access to this agent for all of these things, and that's a lot of trust. Like you want me to trust the agent to make plans for me and spend my money.
No, exactly. If you think about however many agents exist today, I don't know. I heard that, we're talking about a $50 billion market in agents alone by 2030. So a large number of agents will materialize on the scene and be commercially available. And, what's really, I guess, exciting is once you start cascading and connecting these agents together, and sort of the power of what you're talking about really amplifies. But me as a cybersecurity practitioner, what I think about is, I think, wow, like, gosh, this is really going to be changing the world in terms of thinking about it from a cybersecurity standpoint, because your attack surface is so big. Rarely have we had to deal with like truly protocols. Usually we're used to dealing with APIs and making sure that the APIs are secure. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about messaging and protocols, these agents sitting in front of massive data warehouses and what that means. Even the most recent MCP is being adopted holistically across the globe right now by so many, and there isn't even authentication built into it today, right? So there, that's coming in a later roadmap feature. So, I think the world is exciting, but from a cybersecurity standpoint, I feel like it's my job as a practitioner to be working with customers and making sure that they're really thinking holistically about their AI projects and making sure that security is not a bolt-on, but security is considered every step of the way and built in.
Yeah. Well, it dates us some, but I mean, I come from a generation where I grew up on Terminator and Skynet. I grew up on war games and Whopper.
Yeah.
So the first thing I start thinking when you start talking about agentic AI and the AI just doing things, I'm like, yeah, that's how you end up in a thermonuclear war. That like I've seen that movie.
Mhm.
And the thing is, well, I guess I especially had that. Like, it's one thing to just talk about it on a personal or commercial level, but when they start talking about, oh well, Elon Musk is in the Pentagon. They're gonna deploy the Grok AI across the Pentagon to help with blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea. And and that's not even like a thing necessarily against Elon Musk or Grok, although I will be very upfront that those are not my favorites, humans or AI platforms. But I don't care if you take the best AI platform. I'm like, I just don't know if it's a good idea to give an AI platform access to the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm. I know it's the guardrails that one has to think about. And I'll tell you, the infrastructure, it requires a great deal of planning and effort. And I know there's a lot of enterprises and governments that are maybe experimenting today and doing proof of concepts and trials. I totally get that. But at the time, whenever they look at full production deployments, there's so many decisions to be made because the infrastructure is quite complicated. You think about simple things like, am I going to run my what's my LLM? Am I going to just take a pure, sort of open source? Not likely. Or am I going to take some public LLM and train it so that, I know that it's going to know that I don't like pickles because I'm Tony Bradley, right? So let's make sure that it knows that so it gets trained properly. People, I think, will typically do that. And now they have to think about what infrastructure they choose. A lot of people might choose to run it in a hyperscaler, big public cloud provider. Some people, we have several customers that are deploying it in a private cloud environment, one of these NCP partners. We have yet other customers, this government example, to bring it back to your point, they're much more concerned about data leakage, intellectual property getting out there, sensitive data being exposed. So they're often thinking in terms of, well, how do I build up my own AI enterprise data center? So you have all these infrastructure changes that you need to think about. I think a lot of people maybe just think, oh, well, I'm going to just chat GPT it and that's how I'm going to, introduce AI into my environment. But it's going to be much, much more involved in the overall operations of your company. And you really have to think through all those different dynamics.
Fair. Well, let's tie that back then, and there is. I talked recently with Rachel Jin, and you guys have this digital twin capability you just introduced, and what's interesting to me is I wrote a few years ago. And I don't remember what the first thing I wrote about digital twins was, but it was not really in a cybersecurity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It had more to do with manufacturing logistics is what it was. So it was a manufacturing company, and it was basically they had done a digital twin of their factories so that they could basically game out, like just play out scenarios and try to figure out, okay, well, what's going to work best here. More recently, a few months back, National Geographic put out a documentary about the Titanic, and I thought it was very cool. They had sent down unmanned submarines and scanned the entire structure of the Titanic on the floor of the ocean and created a digital twin that they then built a room with like 30-foot high walls where they could display it effectively in, pretty much at full scale. And so you could just walk on the Titanic, and I forget the gentleman's name, but one of the lead researchers, he said, well, one of the things that was really awesome about this digital twin for them is that there are things that they've known about, things that they've wanted to explore and see in the Titanic that they've been unable to because it's unsafe. Like the whole structure is unstable, so they don't really they're certainly not going to send any people in. They also don't want to risk losing an unmanned sub, so they don't really want to get that close. But they were able to scan it in a way where it's like, okay, well, now I can just kind of like go walk around the digital twin version of this and see, well, what's going on here. And using that, they've been able to kind of piece some things together in terms of kind of working back through, like, well, okay, what happened here? Like, how did the Titanic break up? Like, which part sank first? And so it was very interesting to me that they were able to do this digital twin, and that the digital twin was able to empower them to do this sort of like forensic deep dive 150 years after the fact or whatever.
It's crazy. Yeah, I hadn't read that, but it's fascinating what they can do now. Yes, maybe we got our inspiration from your article several years ago. I don't know, but it is the sort of the genesis of an idea from our CEO and co-founder. She's been in the industry as long as me, and always sort of thinking like, what are the infrastructure changes that are going to be appealing to threat actors? So she really thinks like a threat actor, and what are they going to be up to? And as we started to explore, implementing a bunch of capabilities in our unified cybersecurity platform that we sell, in order to protect AI environments. Like, we're not talking about leveraging AI. We do that, but I'm talking about truly protecting AI environments. The blast surface of an issue is pretty big in an AI environment. We talked about the number of agents. We talked about, LLMs, and the thing about LLMs is they treat any data that they're being trained on as factual. So, if that data is modified in any way, so too are the facts, and so too is everything that it's about to do. So you really do have to think about the provenance of the data. You have to think about the protection around the LLM. You have to think about, maybe prompts being manipulated. There's so many different things. And yet you've got this incredibly dynamic environment. So we're thinking, how in the world is a security organization going to be able to keep up? And that's where the genesis of our digital twin environment. It turns out that with a platform like ours, we vacuum, we collect so much valuable telemetry from everywhere across the enterprise, whether it's security telemetry from the endpoint, whether it's security telemetry from the network, maybe your physical data center, perhaps instances running in the cloud or containers. We're collecting email telemetry, the security specifics around email. We know the workflows. We know a lot about your overall environment. And with all of that data, what we realized we could create is a complete replica virtual environment. So that your digital twin. And okay, that's cool, but what can you do with it? Now, all of a sudden, what's compelling is we can be constantly running security exercises. We often refer to them as red teaming exercises, where we're constantly trying to penetrate the compensating controls that are in place because we know the attack paths that the threat actors are going to go through. We can follow them and we can see kind of what's going on. In traditional red teaming, actually most organizations, they will do it once a quarter. Well, imagine if you could do it continuously, like non-stop red teaming. It's constantly running and looking for potential holes in your enterprise security environment. Well, what if, many times whenever a red teaming exercise starts, the IT security folks will say, oh, well, you can touch this environment over here, but don't go anywhere near this environment because this is running, critical applications and production, blah, blah, blah. That's the environment that the threat actors want to go after. So, but it's often excluded from the red teaming exercises. Yeah. Well, in a digital twin environment, you can actually run holistically right across the environment. So we're thinking that from a AI foolproofing standpoint, protecting that infrastructure, that this is one of the best mechanisms for making sure that you constantly have sort of something in place for all the different threat vectors.
And, I hadn't really thought about it like this, but as you were talking, I was thinking about how in cybersecurity, we've got these different things already. There are vendors who do attack surface management. There are vendors that do, cloud posture management. There are vendors that do pen testing and red teaming and those types of things. The digital twin is like one element of that. Another sort of parallel technology or concept that I've talked with vendors about in recent years is the notion of using a data graph, doing a graph analysis. I mean, it's just because in a similar vein, it is like saying, okay, well, let's pull in all the telemetry we can, figure out, how do these dots connect, and then give you a visualization that says, hey, you know what? If you fix this one thing, it'll actually take care of all this thing, all of these other things downstream, which is very useful. But the digital twin also very useful for and especially in the scenario you just described. I mean, when I wrote the thing about the digital twin in manufacturing, and when I started in security, or when I started working in IT and security, I was with EDS and I was doing Microsoft cluster server deployments in General Motors plants, and I know that the General Motors plant it's like a mini fiefdom. Because I thought it was funny when I moved to the security side. I'm gonna date myself a lot here, but we were doing managed antivirus for General Motors. So we created a managed antivirus team where we had a small team of people, but we would oversee all of their antivirus. And at the time they were doing they were doing signature file reviews that took like a month. Like a new DAT file would come out and they would take a month to to review it, test it before they would be like, okay, you can deploy this. And we came in and we were like, okay, that's too long. You know, we're like, McAfee's coming out with a new signature file like daily, and you're taking a month to approve it. And so we went to them and we were like, all right, well, when you do the testing, how often have you done the testing and had it fail? And they're like, well, like 1 out of 100, whatever. Like it was very rare. And we're like, all right, well then consider that that's improbable, and that maybe we shorten that time frame. And so we did get them to do that, but then we get these directives from, I'm like meeting with the C-suite, basically, of General Motors, and we get these directives from the chief executive and the CTO or whatever that says, okay, this is what we're going to do from now on. And I would go to the General Motors plant and I would say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And the manager, I forget his actual title, but the person in charge of the plant would be like, nah. Like, what do you mean, no? The CEO said this is what we're going to do. And they're like, nope. They're like, look, I'm responsible for this plant. I am responsible for the output of this plant. You are not going to do anything in this plant that could in any way potentially disrupt manufacturing. I don't care who said it. And so given that context, it would have been great to be able to go to them and say, okay, well, what if we can do this in a digital twin and I can show you that it works and that it's not going to disrupt manufacturing?
Exactly. What's interesting, the examples you gave around, gosh, it feels familiar to me because you were thinking of attack surface risk management and you were thinking of cloud security posture management. We have those capabilities, and that's where we sort of launched into this notion of, wouldn't it be really powerful if we could create this complete digital twin environment? Because those capabilities that we already have native to our platform, if we expanded them, we could include even more. So it's because of that. It's also because of the graph technology that you mentioned. The fact that technology has evolved. 10 years ago, you couldn't do this sort of thing because neither the generative AI capabilities or the graph technology really existed at the scale that we need it to exist, right? We're talking about, we're talking about petabytes of data, right? So the amount of data is just enormous for an enterprise, and it's those two advances that have really brought us to the point where we could realize this vision, this true vision of a digital twin environment. So yeah, we're quite excited about the promise of it. Because we're excited about AI in general, I think that this actually could offer up something really powerful for enterprises to be rethinking what they do around their cybersecurity, red teaming at least. There's a lot of other things, though, that you start to think about other use cases. So what could you do with this stuff, right? So red teaming is kind of an obvious one, but you could start to think about things like, potentially when you do an analysis and you determine that there's certain attack paths, that are pointing to a specific data source or a specific set of servers because of the sensitivity of the data. So there's some attack paths that you could start to actually experiment with different compensating controls in the virtual environment. You could start to see, okay, well, what are the implications of moving some things around, right? And almost, creating the ability to test drive. Well, what if, we did this? What would it mean to the environment? So there's some really cool things that we think we can also do on top of this. Lots of different use cases. Red teaming is an obvious one to start with, but lots of different use cases.
Yeah, that actually made me think of war games and Whopper again. So it's like, when you get to hopefully I'm not spoiling it for anyone 40 plus years after the fact, but
yeah, I don't think you have to have spoiler alert on this one, okay?
But when you get to the end and he says, well, let's just play tic-tac-toe, and it runs through a billion iterations of playing tic-tac-toe, and then says, hey, you know what? The only way to win is not to play the game. I can envision doing something similar with a graph analysis and a digital twin kind of a scenario to say, hey, like, okay, let's basically run them through. Okay, well, what if I'm going to use passwords as an example. Like, what are the differences between an 8-character password versus a 20-character password? How complex does the password have to be? And instead of it being theoretical, being able to say, okay, well, now I'm going to like run this through a billion iterations and see what, and then I can just give you an actual answer in math terms, and I can say, this, if I'm trying to balance convenience versus security and complexity versus efficiency or whatever, to say, okay, here's the sweet spot. If you do this, yes, it's more secure, but it causes more problems. And like I said, like the digital twin, I feel like it gives you that opportunity to game out some things and really experience them as opposed to just guessing.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, I think it holds a lot of promise. I feel very fortunate in my job. I get to talk to a lot of CIOs, CISOs, about what they're thinking in and around AI. It's actually been a fascinating journey. Actually, I can think back to just last year. I had 50 CISOs in a room, and what were they doing? And unilaterally, all 50 of them were just blocking, just help me, Kevin, so that I can block this stuff right now. But just 12 months later, all of them now, the same 50, almost the same 50 at the same event a year later. And, these CISOs are fully embracing policies in place. They've enabled it in various use cases, starting proof of concepts on various things. So it is moving very, very fast. And I think that, this might be a useful tool for them, at least as I talk to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you and I think have talked about this in the past, but I mean, there's definitely there's shadow AI is real, and there's a lot of parallels of the kind of the AI hype cycle to the original .com boom, and also to the advent of Google as a search engine, where from the .com boom perspective, I feel like it's one of those things where like everyone heard about it, and all of a sudden everyone kind of says, okay, well, that seems like it's something I really should be doing. And so everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon, but most organizations don't actually know why they're jumping on the bandwagon. They don't have a goal. They don't know what they're trying to accomplish by jumping on the bandwagon. They just have FOMO. They just don't want to get left behind by the bandwagon. And I think initially there were a lot of companies that they were like, oh, well, I better go buy tonysbusiness.com. I better go buy that domain before someone else gets it. And then I'm going to set up a website. But then people would just set up like a static billboard website. And it's like, I don't think you didn't get the memo of of what we're supposed to be doing here. When it comes to the kind of the Google boom side of things, or I guess the cloud, I think, is an example everyone uses as a more recent thing. I look at cloud data, data storage. Like when people started using Dropbox and Box and Google Docs and stuff to like share files and offload information, and businesses were like, well, wait a minute, you can't just be sharing our data willy-nilly. We have to block those things. And it's like, in the example you just gave, I feel like what CIOs and CISOs seem to have to learn the hard way every time is it won't work. You can't block it. People will find a way around your blocking. So you need to step back and understand, why are they using it? What are they trying to accomplish that they can't accomplish given the tools and platforms we've already given them? And then how do I either give them the right tools or create policies that allow them to use these tools in a managed and secure way, to address the need. But just blocking it won't work. I mean, if because companies are doing that now, like you said, there are companies who are like, well, we're just going to block access to Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity and Grok, and the thing is, there's an endless number of ands, and you can't block them all. By the time you've blocked one, 10 more have popped up. So I will, as the end user, I can always just go find another AI tool you haven't heard of, and go around your thing. So instead of trying to block me, you need to figure out how to help me.
Yeah. To a certain extent, I think it is, we're talking about constituent, like, your employees sort of rolling in the unbridled enthusiasm around AI and whatnot and jumping on board, and CISOs trying to do their jobs by just stopping it. But you're right, it just a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can remember, I thought one of the examples you might give was around hyperscalers, because I can remember, when public cloud was taking off, and for the most part, it started with born in the cloud companies. So that was a little bit easier. But then all of a sudden, the enterprises started to embrace hey, maybe I can start moving workloads to the cloud and save a bit of money. And I can remember, I won't mention the customer's name, but I can remember leaving a meeting in New York, this large bank, medium to large bank, leaving a meeting from the CISO, walked out. He had just finished telling me that they're not embracing the cloud. They have nothing going on and whatnot. And I walked out of the building and I looked up at this massive glass tower thinking, how could this, good-sized company not have anything going on from a public cloud perspective? And a week later, that same bank announced $1 billion committed consumption contract with AWS. So there was stuff going on. It's just the IT practitioners were not in the loop, right? I think in this particular case, I think we are going to see them in the loop. There's so much visibility on these projects. So I think it's going to be a little bit different. I do agree with the notion of there is shadow AI going on, but I think it's not shadow IT AI. I think that the IT folks are trying, that they're embracing it. They're getting involved. They don't have a choice because the costs, are real. The data center requirements are real. The data and the need for the data to be cleansed and the provenance of it and categorized. All of those are real requirements that you really need, the IT organization to be involved with. So I don't think it's going to be quite the same as what we saw unfold with public cloud, but there are some similarities.
Well, and the other thing too is, even as you say, okay, well, I don't want you to use ChatGPT or whatever, but then, if you're using Google, productivity tools, then Google just goes, hey, look, here's our AI. If you're using Microsoft, they're like, hey, look, here's Copilot. So it's like, even the tools you're already using are like throwing it in there. So like, while you're trying to fight against it, it's like it's seeping in through the things that you're actually using, and it's like, well, you can't start blocking the tools you actually use.
That's why
and
it's so important for them to get out in front of this, right? So for sure, right? Because it's finding its way in one way or the other, and just embrace it.
yeah. Um, I wanted to go a little bit deeper on Trend Micro's digital twin capabilities. I saw the release, and I know that there's you guys are working pretty closely with NVIDIA. Um, what does that partnership look like? What is the collaboration between Trend and NVIDIA? Like what is their AI infrastructure bringing that allows you to do what you're trying to do from a security perspective?
Mm-hmm. We're actually following a playbook that we've executed several times, and that is, in following the big infrastructure changes, we follow those because we know threat actors also follow those big infrastructure changes. And we did it with 15 years ago when data centers were being modernized. We partnered really closely with VMware at the time and made sure that security wasn't an afterthought, it was built in. We did it when public cloud was getting going 10 years ago. We partnered really, really closely with AWS. Of course, we support all hyperscalers now. We support all virtualization engines now, but we pick one that we're going to go really, really deep with. It was an obvious one to pick NVIDIA when this generative AI infrastructure change was sort of starting to flow through. Of course, it was an obvious one, but maybe not as obvious as what people think. Both Trend and NVIDIA are fundamentally Taiwanese founded companies. We're both still run and led by our founders over 3 decades later. That's pretty rare in tech to actually have both Taiwanese founders. They know one another. Taiwan has become quite a epicenter for all things AI, understandably. So it was just logical for us to work really, really closely with NVIDIA. Will we have plans to support a broader portfolio of infrastructure, GPU and TPU infrastructure, DPU infrastructure over time? Absolutely. But right now we're going super deep with NVIDIA, and that was important. So literally having an engineering team working with an engineering team and figuring out, us from a cybersecurity standpoint, NVIDIA, they want to make sure that security is built in as well, right? So if you look at, it doesn't matter what industry analyst report you see, customers will say that the number one objection that they have to deal with around AI deployments is some verbiage around cybersecurity. Sometimes they use the word intellectual property leakage or privacy or, compliance with, regulatory requirements or whatever, but it's all, number one is always cybersecurity related. So we wanted to make sure that we were working closely in order to, keep this journey of AI mass deployment going. And so we literally have engineering teams working with engineering teams. We we feel like that's the best way to actually evolve and learn quickly.
Okay, makes sense. And you're right. It is unique, anomalous even, to have companies as successful as Trend and NVIDIA that have their original founding CEOs or whatever in place this far along. So it is a testament to both companies and both CEOs. As we are, we're kind of winding to the end, I wanted to ask, I guess, kind of a two-part question. One is just sort of for any CISOs or IT leaders who might be listening, what practical advice do you have to help them prepare for AI-driven threats, with or without digital twin adoption. But then the follow-on being, how do you envision digital twin technology sort of evolving over the next 2-3 years for cybersecurity? Like, where do we go?
It's not an easy one-part answer to that first question. If I were to give any advice to CIOs and CISOs, if you haven't done it yet, I would strongly encourage to get some proof of concept trials going internally to learn, because the complexity around the amount of decisions that need to be made around the infrastructure are big and important. And for a variety of reasons, people are going to go in different directions. I would encourage people whoever you end up going with, but not to consider cybersecurity to be an afterthought. It's always much harder to bolt on afterwards. So, truly be thinking about it upfront is paramount. Don't wait till it's ready to go into production. And then you start to think about what compensating controls you need to have in place. And then what was the second question, Tony?
Second part was about how do you what do the next 2 or 3 years look like for digital twin technology for cybersecurity?
I think there's a lot of promise in it. I think that this notion that it could allow us to evolve to sort of an always on type of paradigm where we can constantly be tweaking and tuning and testing an incredibly complex and dynamic environment. I think it holds out a lot of promise. And I'm optimistic that we're going to see a lot of very clever use cases evolve from this. Red teaming is an obvious one to start off with, but we already have on the roadmap a number of different ideas for how we can leverage this. Truly is a platform, right? It's part of our overall platform that we're delivering on. Gartner have a stat out there that says that over half of enterprises are going to continue to go down the platform path, and I think this being one of our capabilities in our kit bag is really going to be very helpful for cybersecurity practitioners out there. So we're excited.
All right. Well, always a pleasure to chat. Always have fun doing our briefings and interviews. Happy to have you on the podcast, and I just want to thank you for taking the time.
I can't tell you how privileged I am. Thanks, Tony.